there's no real need for a build up, you already know what this video is about.
Let's get scratching.
Jet Set Radio is emblematic of the Dreamcast, just as much as titles like Sonic Adventure, Crazy Taxi or Shenmue. Everything that SEGA put out during its criminally short lifespan reeked of a desire to reclaim the status that they once held. While they obviously failed in the long run, their attempt at redemption was more than admirable, and because of that the Dreamcast is my favourite of their systems. Sure, I grew up with some of its best games, but SEGA's spirit during this era is why I hold so much affinity for it. Jet Set Radio specifically though, is a bit different to some of its contemporaries. I'd wager that it's one of the most influential games that the Dreamcast has to offer, but I suppose that begs the question, why do people remember Jet Set Radio so fondly, and why does its DNA still seep into modern media to this very day? You're watching a Jet Set Radio retrospective. I suppose something unique about the Dreamcast was that all of its most popular titles completely oozed with visual charm, and Jet Set Radio was probably one of the last games of its generation to be truly revolutionary in the graphical department. Cell shading is the name of the game, sharp rendering on models and environments that makes everything seem hand-drawn, cartoonish and slick. Likely done in part to give Jet Set a visual identity that wouldn't age like milk, it also masks some of the rough edges on models seen in games around this time. This was the first game to ever properly use cell shading as a main art style, and it's aged gracefully, no doubt helped by the beautiful, vibrant colour palette. Every single environment just pops. No matter where you are, Jet Set Radio isn't just a treat for the eyes, but also a treat for the ears. Hideki Naganuma composed the score, and calling said score anything less than mesmerising should be classed as an insult. When you boot this thing up for the first time, and Let Mum Sleep assaults your ears, you know what kind of ride you're in for.
Let's look at the funk.
Every song keeps with the same general vibe, but none of them feel too similar to one another, which is a very impressive feat. Many of these have made their way into my playlist, and it's easy to see why once you have a listen to some of them. The licensed offerings are also pretty solid, with a surprise appearance from Rob Zombie, but Naganuma's compositions are immaculate, and they're what immediately comes to mind when I think of this game. His distinct musical DNA in tandem with the popping visual style makes visiting Tokyo To feel like being transported back to the 2000s. Whenever people reminisce on their experience with Jet Set Radio, they always harp on about its presentation and theming, for very good reasons of course, as I've outlined, but you never really hear anyone praise or even discuss the gameplay. However, now that I've played through it for the first time, I kind of see why that's the case. Now, despite anything that I say here, I must stress that a lot of this game's ideas were very unique for the time, and even today. Jet Set Radio fuses platforming and extreme sports to create a very unique gameplay style. It's unlike anything I've ever really seen in gaming. Your character travels on skates, using them to grind on rails, slide on walls and perform tricks, combining these moves to rack up combos and improve your score. Though since this is far from the only thing to worry about during gameplay, pulling off combos isn't done through super precise button timings or complex inputs. Tricks are performed automatically after jumping from the ground, off an incline, or off of a rail with enough speed, placing the focus entirely on managing speed and planning out your jumps. If Jet Set had a Tony Hawk style trick system, we'd be in for some problems. Unfortunately though, this solid basis can never reach its full potential because of the way that your character feels to control. Playable characters have varying stats, but that means almost nothing. Category names are unclear and they're never explained in game, so that's already ducked some points. Power refers to your max health, techniques means how many points you'll get for tricks and combos, and a higher graffiti stat allows you to tag graffiti spots faster. There are a lot of playable characters and some of them handle similarly to others, but it doesn't help that there are even some hidden stats that differentiate them even further, such as acceleration and turning, which are pretty crucial in a game where momentum and planning are keys to success, as well as how many spray cans you can hold at any one time. Hidden stats are one of my pet peeves in games, and that obviously persists here. No matter which character you choose though, you'll be faced with a fair amount of jank, clunkiness, and in the original Dreamcast version, an awkward camera that doesn't want to give you the time of day. No matter what their stats are, each character feels unnecessarily heavy. I felt like I was piloting a huge truck every time I made a stop, and you drop to the ground after a jump faster than a rock could ever dream of. Your momentum, unless you're performing tricks or combos, isn't natural whatsoever and is impossible to maintain. I know the counter argument for this is just to get good or whatever, but the game presents far less opportunities for you to chain together moves than you'd expect. And don't even get me started on those half pints, oh my lord. But to be honest, I can't really fault Smilebit for some of this, as 3D game design was still very much in its heyday, but it makes the game a challenge to stomach, especially for new players. The HD remaster adds full camera control at least, but that's pretty much all that it added, and I'd argue that's a pretty big problem for a game that already was quite dated in 2012, but even more so in 2026. Reflecting this, the remaster was a critical bomb when up against the ratings of the Dreamcast version, which proves my point that the controls are dated even further. Most missions see you search the level for red arrows which must be sprayed or tagged with graffiti. Spray all of them and you win. Tagging is a great mechanic when we're talking about smaller pieces of graffiti. Press the trigger in the arrow's vicinity and you're golden. The spot is claimed and there's nothing more to think about. Large pieces of graffiti though are a bit more complicated, since to tag them you need to complete a quick time event. Depending on the size of the piece you'll have more or less inputs to complete, which completely halts the pace but grants you more points depending on your performance. I find these to be a pain, especially for pieces that require upwards of 10 inputs. I would much rather a cap of 3 or something. These are the best missions in the game all around though, so it's appropriate that they're the most abundant. Learning the lay of the land and taking out big pieces first before enemies get the chance to spawn in is the key to mastering these levels. And these tagging missions are fantastic for teaching you how to optimise your runs and forge your own path to the open-ended goal. I also enjoy the face-offs with different characters. Not only are they fun ways to unlock the vast majority of Jet Set's pretty packed roster, they're great for handing out various tips and tricks that you might otherwise not have thought about. If these mission types are solid, then the other two are, well, not that. Races, as rare as they are a good concept. Race a rival character to the goal. Simple enough until you realise that the game only shows you the location of the finish line and not the route that you must take to get there. This is stupid because it requires players to have knowledge on areas that they haven't visited yet, or areas that they didn't realise were interconnected. Tagger's Tag sees you chase down 3 members of a rival gang and tag their back to take them out. Again, a good idea for a mission, but one that's squandered when you realise that the ideal way to win is to exploit movement patterns and mindlessly mash the trigger when behind a rival. The ranking system at play is fitting though. More knowledge of the level design, more tricks and less enemy encounters in a shorter amount of time will equate to a higher rank. But I have trouble determining how lenient this system really is. Your first few runs through a level are probably going to feel rough, like really rough, and they certainly did for me. If that's the case then, why did I end up getting the highest or second highest rank fairly consistently? In contrast, I performed better on some later levels, but was ranked poorly. I know that each level has score requirements, etc., but from my experience this system seems to be in need of some fine tuning. The level design and structure of Jet Set Radio, more than anything else, is puzzling to me. Basic movement is a bit awkward, but the foundation for a great control scheme is more than visible. If the level design accommodated the focus on tricking and combos, then skilled players could avoid lots of the jank. I'm happy to report that, at least somewhat, Jet Set's level design is competent and feels well tailored to the core gameplay. Most of them are open and multi-layered with many grind rails and walls to ride on, along with areas that are accessible via simple stepping stones, but can be reached faster if you know the lay of the land. Kogene shows this off perfectly. After taking the steps near the start of the level, you're guided towards a bridge that loops round to the rest of the level, but a skillful wall ride and jump combo can bypass this entirely, making for a great time save. Or here again in the same level, where staying on this grind rail long enough will open up a shortcut to this tower in the middle of the water. Unfortunately though, I think that this level selection is a pretty mixed bag. There's a lot of variety in how they're laid out, but that's not exactly a good thing in this scenario. Bus Terminal is a pretty solid entry level with a plethora of rails to glide on and elevated areas which can be reached within seconds if you're good enough. Park Street is a tad more complex, with a sewer lurking beneath it acting as punishment for missing a jump, but since you can access most parts of this level directly from the sewer, it isn't too harsh. I definitely think that the section around the park itself is too condensed for its own good, with loads of different rails to grind on jammed into one small area, not at all helped by the issues I have with the controls. But the rest of the area is open, so it's not a huge deal. Kogene Residential is an example of a level that I think works despite how claustrophobic it is, simply because of the frequency and variety of alternate routes to take. Residential's variety makes it a strong contender for my favourite level in the game, but it's not like it has much competition. Jinsai Lane is good when you're switching between the streets and rooftops, dodging enemies and making tight jumps to stay on top, but about a third of the level feels unfinished, with no route that takes you up high whatsoever. I prefer this stage if it was more challenging, with tagging spots only placed on the rooftops segregated by tricky jumps, and more of a punishment for falling down. Since the tagging spots are divided fairly equally between both layers, it makes the distinction between said layers feel redundant. Everything else though, I'm not so sure. The Japanese version of the game excludes 2 levels made specifically for Western audiences, created for the sole reason of trying to appeal to Western audiences. Just goes to show that this was a pretty stupid thought process, as these exclusive levels are the weakest on offer by far. Bantam Street is the least offensive of the two, even though it has some really awkward collectible placement and oddly segmented level design, but Grind Street? Abysmal. The space between the streets and the rooftops is so huge that the latter can only be accessed via slow moving lifts, which must be taken again and again with every small mistake that you make. If the rails that you use to traverse the rooftops weren't placed so haphazardly and carelessly, then it wouldn't be so harsh. But as it stands, this is the only level that I call a complete disaster. At least it looks nice, but great, water's wet. Every level looks nice. You can so easily tell that the decision to create Western exclusive levels was made late into development. The back half of the game has no new levels whatsoever. Instead, you play a series of missions which require you to travel across usually 2 or 3 of the game's existing levels in one run and tag spots in each area. There are 0 noticeable level design changes, and the tagging spots aren't altered enough to make for interesting revisits, so I'm very tempted to say that after Grind Street you don't play a single new level besides the final boss. I won't pretend that this concept of a marathon styled run isn't interesting and it makes Tokyo Toe pretty cohesive, but it making up some of the last few levels is incredibly disappointing and quite pathetic. I haven't been very kind to it, but I wouldn't call Jet Set Radio style over substance. I can count on one hand at most the times that I've seen online discussion regarding its gameplay, controls, level design or structure. And the reason for this obviously relates to its ridiculously strong thematic identity. This is the Jet Set Radio that people remember. Not this. And after my first playthrough, I get it. It's a game that I respect without enjoying all too much. Thank God, though, that it wasn't left to die alongside the Dreamcast.
Understand the concept of love. Understand the concept of love. Understand the concept of love.
Jet Set Radio Future is not a sequel, not even close. It's Jet Set Radio if it was made a generation later on superior hardware with a more experienced dev team. Smilebit returns for this one, and it shows. I tolerated Jet Set Radio, but I love Jet Set Radio Future. No catch. It's one of the coolest reimaginings that I've ever seen in any form of media. Some might argue against this, but while Future inherits its older brother's beautiful cel-shaded look, it gives off a completely different vibe. The colour palette is no longer vibrant, it's a lot darker, atmospheric and moody, with plenty of greens, browns, dark purples and various neon lights. It's still cool, but it isn't gritty or anything, it's just a different kind of stylization. Sure, sometimes locales remind me of ones from the first game, whether that be through aesthetics or level design, specifically in Shibuya Terminal, 99th Street and Kibugaka Hill, but mostly the atmosphere feels different to before. I think I flat out prefer this look. It represents the new generation while honouring the one that came before. And when talking about the vibe, again, I have to mention that music. I don't love every song. Birthday Cake forced me to mute the TV each time it came on, and when the game switches through only a few songs for each portion of the story, some of them can get a bit tiring. But you know what song I'll never tire of? Funky fucking Dealer. One of my favourite songs in anything, full stop. This soundtrack has so much variety and personality, which in my opinion makes it Hideki Naganuma's crowning achievement. I wish physical copies of it didn't cost an arm and a leg. Jet Set Radio was heavy, restrictive and awkward to control, but Future is light, freeing and floaty. Ground movement is way faster and you don't need to keep mashing the trigger to surpass walking speed anymore, thank god. Gravity hardly exists now. It takes quite a while to land after you jump, which makes it far easier to connect tricks. Something that works wonders for this game's abundance of combo opportunities. Rail grinding used to be painful because of how hard it was to gain momentum, but every time you jump onto a rail in Future your momentum gets a huge boost, removing virtually all previous grinding related jank. You get the idea. Everything about the control scheme has seen a significant touch up, but we've also got some new bells and whistles to spice things up. You can hit the X button when grinding on rails or while mid-air to perform a trick during combos, racking up more points and maintaining the flow. It isn't game changing, but it adds more player input, presents opportunities for higher combos, and just feels great to do. The bigger addition is the boost. You can activate a boost at virtually any time, but it costs 10 spray cans and only lasts about 3 seconds. Pairing it with a jump can open up huge shortcuts, and it fits in with the series' design philosophy so well that I'm shocked it wasn't included from the start. Since most characters can hold up to 30 spray cans at one time, it forces you to use it wisely and manage your inventory. A great new mechanic that fits perfectly. We aren't out of the woods just yet though, the controls aren't completely flawless. It can be hard to adjust your sideways momentum when jumping from rails, making select sections a bit of a pain in the arse, and air control is still finicky, however nowhere near as tight and restricting as it was in the first game. But everything else is basically perfect. And you can move and stunt so fluidly in ways that would have been completely impossible in the first game unless you were the greatest speedrunner to ever live. It's not the only reason why Future feels so good to play though. Some levels in Jet Set felt like platforming levels meant for a game with conventional controls that you just so happened to roller skate around. They were too condensed and small, which led to bite-sized runs unless you were at the tail end of the game, and mechanics were underused because the level design didn't complement your abilities well enough. Future has much larger levels on average, and the designs are now tailor-made to this style of game. Numerous grind rails that can be jumped between, far more walls to ride on, multiple different pathways and shortcuts, higher routes that take mastery to maintain, and an overall unbelievable sense of flow during basically every single tagging mission. On top of that, all tagging spots only need to be sprayed to be claimed, with larger pieces requiring more spray cans to complete like before, but doing away with the pace ruining QuickTime event, obviously for the better. Dogenzaka Hill is a phenomenal opener. It teaches you about hidden routes, choosing between a faster path or a slower path that nets you more spray cans, gives you hills to use your boost for a shortcut, and following the opening tagging mission is a race where you traverse the same path again, but under the gun of a timer. And this time the game kindly shows you the route. Elevation is abundant in Shibuya Terminal, feeling like an expanded version of the first game's bus terminal but with far more rail grinding and tricking opportunities. Rokkaku Heights showcases how beneficial it is that you can now grind vertically up poles and street lamps, giving the feature a lot more versatility and opening up chances for level design to be more vertically oriented, which is put to excellent use in Route 99, an area that features a dragon wrapped around a high tower. This tower can be scaled by grinding on the dragon's tail, and once you reach the top you can use it as a vantage point to access other routes that can't be easily accessed from the ground. The skyscraper district is teeming with jumps to be made and slopes that can be tricked off of. The sense of scale here is pretty incredible. I just feel like it would be better if the level wasn't so segmented. Segmentation is probably the biggest problem that these levels face. Kibugaka Hill spreads everything out far too much and brings out the awful rigid rooftop from the first game to fight against. Haikage Street is 3 squares that have to be reached by separate narrow alleyways, and said squares only include some stairways to grind up and that's pretty much it. It's not dreadful, but it's a nothing burger of a level that I forgot about until looking back through my footage. The residential zone is a complete mess. It is the only level in the game with a time limit, and said time limit is 30 minutes. There is a reason for this, but it isn't a good one. You need to find multiple switches that shut off an armed explosive. But the level looks so samey and it's so sprawling that it's hard to tell where you haven't already been. After certain milestones, more areas open up to you, but the game never lets you know this, so honestly, just look up a guide. I actually think that I'd rather play Grind Street, because at least there you could be done in 4 or 5 minutes. This is just a tedious stage that's huge for almost no reason. That's just a small portion of them though. For the most part, they're excellent levels that are fully realised and incredibly easy to waste hours in just skating to your heart's content. And you don't select them from a menu anymore either. Future abolishes the level select and connects all 16 levels like the first game did for its 3 turfs. You seldom have to switch between levels during a single mission, so we never fall into the same trap that the first game did with its semi-open world, and Future is much better for it. For a game with movement that is so addictive, it's hardly ever a problem having to travel to the next objective because you can do it with style at your own pace, using the time to refine your skills. It's genius. Aesthetics might clash when switching to a level that's set at a different time of day, but mechanically it's implemented almost flawlessly. And because we've gone open world and embraced freedom, we've lost the first game's timer and ranking system. You still get points in Future for combos and tagging, but they aren't really used for anything other than side missions. I'm not too torn about this. Smilebit created such an addictive gameplay loop that I can enjoy myself aimlessly connecting tricks without stressing about a timer or planning out a route in a tagging mission. But I also won't pretend that some kind of ranking system would be appreciated. It shouldn't betray Future's identity as a sandbox, extreme sports platformer type thing, but I digress. The real reason that timers and ranks have been axed is to emphasise exploration. Each level contains collectibles called graffiti souls, which mostly require knowledge of the level design and your moveset to nab. They don't do all that much besides unlock one story mission, but seeking them out is enjoyable, so you probably won't have to search for more when you reach said story mission. They're a pseudo replacement for the ranking system, and I'm thankful for their inclusion, but I wasn't incentivized to go back and find them all after beating the campaign, which likely wasn't the devs' intention. All of this is fantastic, but at some point, the cracks in Future's design begin to form. For starters, I like the level design and structure a lot, but when story beats influence you to do anything other than exploring and spraying graffiti, I'm not having a great time. The game is loosely split up into 9 different chapters that separate the events of the story. An entire chapter sees you being kidnapped by a rival gang, the Noise Tanks, and forced to play 3 rounds of a bare bones minigame called Death Ball with boring level design and brain dead AI to boot. It's hardly worth talking about and ends before it ever really gets going. It's not a long chapter, but it's a long waste of time. It's boring. At one point, your graffiti souls get stolen and you have to chase Clutch across Tokyo To. He hides in one of 3 levels and you have to move from one side of the city to another, chasing him before he moves to the next location, under the gun of an invisible timer. It could be a fun time trial challenge if you were shown the timer on screen, but in execution it's just padding. Future also contains several boss fights. Why? I haven't talked about the combat yet because it's so unremarkable that it isn't even a joke. Sometimes during a level you'll be ambushed by the police and must defeat them before you can continue with your objective. Already kind of annoying, but the combat equates to dash into the enemy and spray them once with graffiti. I don't think a combat system really belongs in Jet Set Radio. Boss fights though, even worse. This is probably the only thing that Future's predecessor does better. There was one boss fight at the end that was platforming based and you hardly interacted with the boss itself. It wasn't great, it was anticlimactic if anything, but it wasn't annoying. Future's bosses are annoying, every single one of them. They either end before they begin or drag on for centuries. Wait for an opening then spray the enemy. Chase the train with zero urgency and tag it up close. This is a highlight. The strategy is to hang back and wait for the train to stop, then boost towards it and tag it for easy damage. You're littered in health pickups too, as if the train is going to shower you in attacks. Awful fight. The only one with even an ounce of challenge is the Meg in Hakeke Street, but that isn't a compliment. It sits at the top of the stairs and every time you're hit, which is quite easy because of how poorly the attacks are coded, you fall all the way to the bottom and have to climb up again. It isn't easy to work out where you're supposed to deal damage from either, so that just adds to the frustration. This fight isn't hard at all, it's just tedious. It took me about 15 minutes to finish, laugh it up, and when you fight the same boss later on flat ground, it's over in seconds. I don't understand why boss fights were included and the game would be far better off without them. But it speaks to Future's quality overall that its biggest issues can be completely disregarded when it's at its best. Something that I can't say about the first game. Its controls, flow and sense of style are so addictive that I can see myself popping it in from time to time, loading up my save file and just skating around, performing tricks and achieving high combos for absolutely no reason. It's one of the most special and memorable games from the 2000s, and it's a real shame that SEGA doesn't care. Jet Set Radio Future was released in 2000 exclusively on the original Xbox. It has never been re-released and I doubt that it will ever be. The simple answer as to why this is the case is probably because it has licensed music, but I think it goes a bit deeper than this. Future was originally planned to release for the Dreamcast, but development shifted over to the Xbox after Sega's final ship started to sink. I presume that the Xbox was chosen for Future over the GameCube and PS2 because it was the most powerful console of the 6th generation, and Sega wanted to emphasise the style that the first game was known for with as much power as possible. The game runs well on emulators, but on consoles, I think re-releasing it could be tricky since the Xbox's architecture is far from simple, making it difficult to port its games over to other consoles. The Xbox is pretty famously cheap to collect for, but at least in PAL territories, Future is one of the more pricey titles. Okay, well, I guess it's not ridiculously expensive, it's nothing on the price that its soundtrack goes for nowadays. But it all ties into a problem with game preservation in its entirety. Thankfully, the game is playable on Xbox 360 through backwards compatibility, but you still need a physical copy of the game. Want to know a secret though? This is a combo disc containing Jet Set Radio Future and Sega GT 2002, packaged with some original Xbox models as a marketing tactic. This disc goes for relatively cheap online and it works on Xbox 360, which is how I played Future for this video. If you played an Xbox game on 360 through backwards compatibility before, you'll know that it isn't always ideal. Some levels have tons of slowdown and textures can flicker on rare occasions, but it isn't game breaking. I battled against 2 emulators for several hours trying to get Future working for this video and it just didn't want to boot up, so this was my only choice. I encourage you to experience Future this way if you're against emulation, for whatever reason. It's just a shame that it has to be this way. We were teased with the new Jet Set Radio game a couple years ago as part of Sega's Power Surge movement thingy, but we haven't seen any more of it since then and I'm slightly worried. I sorely hope that the series sees a revival in the coming years, but it's heartwarming to see its influence on so many others. Bomb Rush Cyberfunk is a game that I've sunk less than an hour into, but what I have played of it was a lot of fun and seemed like a faithful evolution of Jet Set Radio's gameplay loop. Naganuma's iconic sound has stuck with thousands of people and has no doubt inspired the music of many others. Cell shading has been a staple art style since Jet Set pioneered it in 2000, used in many games later down the line such as Wind Waker, Okami and various Telltale games. I could go on really. I don't find the first Jet Set Radio to have much going for it beyond its style, but I can still recognise how much passion and love was put into it, even when the whole package isn't as agreeable in my eyes. Jet Set Radio Future is an experience that will stick with me for years, I can tell that's the case. I have heaps and heaps of respect for Smilebit for putting their lives and souls into this duology, only to be renamed and restructured a few years later. Art is powerful, and when a piece of art can still be influential or memorable years after its creator has probably acknowledged its success, that's something special. Jet Set Radio is special, and that's something that we'll never forget. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.